They saw a man in the distance, holding a measuring line, not to build walls, but to measure destiny. What he was about to reveal would shake Jerusalem's future and echo through eternity. Welcome to Divine War Stories, where visions, battles, and heavenly encounters come alive. Here, we uncover the stories where God steps into history, reshaping the fate of nations and the hearts of his people. It was a quiet vision, yet it carried the weight of a storm, the kind that does not roar but seeps into your bones, making you tremble. Zechariah lifted his eyes, and there it was, a man, steady and focused, with a measuring line in his hand. Not rushing, not hesitating, simply walking with purpose toward Jerusalem. The prophet's heart quickened. This was no ordinary surveyor, and this was no ordinary task. In that moment, every breath of the city, every stone in its wall, every life within its gates seemed to hang on what this mysterious figure was about to do. The silence between them was heavy, charged with meaning, as if heaven itself leaned closer to watch. Zechariah called out, "Where are you going?" His voice cracked, not out of fear, but from the weight of knowing that answers could change everything. The man's reply was calm yet powerful, "To measure Jerusalem." Simple words, yet behind them was the thunder of prophecy. Measuring meant defining, setting boundaries, shaping destiny. It meant the city's future was being drawn not by human rulers but by the hand of God through his messenger. Zechariah felt a chill. This was not just about walls and gates, it was about protection, about God deciding the exact space his people would occupy, a divine claim on earthly soil. As Zechariah stood there, another figure appeared, an angel who had been speaking to him before. The angel moved quickly, urgency in his steps, as though carrying orders that could not wait. Suddenly, a second angel came to meet him, their voices low but intense. "Run," one said to the other. "Tell that young man. Jerusalem will be a city without walls because of the great number of people and animals in it." The words burned in Zechariah's mind. No walls. In a time when cities relied on fortifications for survival, this was unthinkable. And yet, the message was clear. God himself would be the city's wall. The vision began to unfold like a great tapestry. The measuring line was not a tool of limitation but of expansion. This was not about confining Jerusalem, it was about freeing it from the fear of enemies. "I myself," God declared through the angel, "will be a wall of fire around it, and I will be its glory within." Zechariah could almost see it, a blazing barrier no army could breach, a glow of divine presence radiating from the center. The city would not be safe because of human strategies but because the creator of the universe had chosen to guard it. But with the promise came an urgent call. "Come, call me. Flee from the land of the north." It was not a gentle suggestion, it was a rescue command. God was gathering his people from exile, pulling them out of danger, telling them to leave behind their old captivity and step into a new chapter. Zechariah felt the tension. How often people cling to what is familiar, even when it is broken. Yet here was God, shaking the dust off their feet and saying, "You are mine. Come home." The message was not just for Israel, it rippled outward. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. This was not only about one city's restoration, it was about the world's invitation. Zechariah saw it. Strangers becoming family, outsiders becoming insiders, all gathered under the same fiery protection of God's presence. It was more than rebuilding walls, it was about expanding hearts, tearing down the barriers between God and humanity. The vision carried a rhythm, urgency, promise, warning, hope. God was making a bold declaration. He would dwell in the midst of his people. This was not a distant deity sending messages from afar. This was the Lord saying, "I will live with you." The intimacy of those words struck Zechariah. It was one thing to be protected by God, but another entirely to be inhabited by him. It meant his glory would not just surround the city, it would fill it. The measuring line now felt like a promise in motion, a symbol that God was already shaping the future. Zechariah realized that every line drawn in that vision was a step toward the day when no enemy could intimidate them, no fear could paralyze them. And yet, the vision also demanded trust. No walls meant vulnerability, unless you believed that God's wall of fire was real. The question hung in the air. Would they believe enough to live without human defenses, relying only on the invisible yet unstoppable presence of God. The angel's urgency was not just about physical relocation, it was about spiritual positioning. To be in the place God measured for you was to be in the center of His will, under His direct protection. Staying in exile meant staying exposed to danger. Coming into God's measured space meant stepping into safety and purpose. The vision wasn't only about Jerusalem's map, it was about each heart being measured, claimed, and secured by God. As the scene faded, Zechariah was left with a burning truth. The measuring line was never meant to imprison, it was meant to set free. God was drawing lines that defined destiny, not boundaries that confined life. The man with the measuring line was not a builder of walls, but a herald of God's glory, preparing the way for a city so full of His presence that no stone barrier could contain it. And even now, centuries later, that vision still asks us the same question. Will we trust the fire of God more than the walls of men? If you are enjoying this video, please like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to help this channel reach more people. Now let's continue. Zechariah's mind could not let go of the image, the man with the measuring line, the urgency of the angels, the promise of God's fire. It was more than a prophecy about land. It was a picture of divine strategy. God was showing that real security comes not from what we build, but from who surrounds us. The measuring line was being stretched not just across the earth, but across the hearts of the people, marking them as His own. Even as the prophet stood there, he felt the weight of a truth that would echo across generations. When God claims a place, it becomes untouchable by any enemy. The people, scattered in exile, would have heard these words with mixed emotions, hope battling with fear. To leave the comfort of what they had known in foreign lands, even in captivity, required courage. Yet God's voice through Zechariah was tender and commanding. Come home. I will be with you. There was no promise of an easy road, no illusion of a conflict-free future. Instead, there was the assurance of God's active presence, a wall of fire that no army could breach, and a glory so radiant that darkness would have no place to hide. In that vision, Zechariah understood something profound. God measures differently than we do. We measure by what we see, square footage, resources, manpower. God measures by what He has planned, purpose, calling, destiny. The city's boundaries were not just physical, they were spiritual declarations. It was as if the measuring line was inscribing heaven's will onto the earth, aligning the visible with the invisible. This was a kingdom blueprint, one that no earthly king could alter and no enemy could erase. The angel's presence reminded Zechariah that heaven was not distant from the affairs of men. They moved with urgency, carrying messages, delivering orders, assuring that every step of this vision unfolded exactly as God intended. The spiritual realm was deeply involved in shaping the fate of Jerusalem. This was not just divine observation, it was divine intervention. The measuring line was not merely held by a man, it was directed by the very authority of heaven. And then came the wider revelation, this was not just for Israel. God's promise that many nations would join His people was radical. It tore through the walls of exclusivity and invited the world into His presence. The fire around Jerusalem was not meant to keep others out, but to keep His glory in. Zechariah saw a future where the city became a beacon, drawing people from every land to worship the one true God, not by force of arms, but by the force of His love and power. For those who doubted, the vision stood as both a challenge and an invitation. Could they trust God enough to live without the safety nets of human control? Could they believe that an unseen wall of fire was stronger than any fortress? Zechariah knew that faith would be the real battleground, not the fields outside Jerusalem's gates, but the inner walls of the human heart, where fear and trust wrestled for dominance. The call to flee from the land of the north still rings in the air today. It is a call to leave behind anything that keeps us outside the space God has measured for us. For some, that exile is physical, for others, it's emotional or spiritual. But the truth remains, only within God's boundaries is there true security. The measuring line is still stretched across lives, marking places of promise, inviting people into divine protection and purpose. As the vision closed, Zechariah was left with a lingering awe. The man with the measuring line was not just measuring a city, he was measuring a testimony, a living proof that God keeps His word. The fire around Jerusalem was not just a shield, it was a declaration that this city belonged to the Lord of hosts. Every stone, every street, every life within it was covered by his covenant, wrapped in his glory. Generations later, the story still speaks. It whispers to those standing at the edge of faith, wondering if God's promises are enough. It tells them that his plans are larger than our fears, his protection greater than our walls, and his presence more satisfying than any security we could build for ourselves. The measuring line is still in motion, and the question remains, will we step inside the space he has drawn for us? And so, the vision of the measuring line in Zechariah's day becomes a vision for us. God is still measuring, still calling, still surrounding his people with fire and filling them with his glory. The invitation is clear: come into his measured place, trust his invisible wall, and live in the center of his plan. Because when God draws the line, it is not to limit, it is to protect, to expand, and to fill with his presence. The safest place in the world is not behind human walls, but within the boundaries God has set for your life.